A Texas-size preview with horns247.com's beat reporter, Eric Henry, coming at you right now on the Hoopscap.
Let's get it, 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 let's get it. Yeah. UConn, baby. Home of the champions. Let's go.
Welcome to the Hoopscap, powered by Big East Energy, your only source for daily coverage of both the men's and women's basketball program. Today's show is presented by the law offices of James E. Sulik, reliable attorneys right there in South Windsor, Connecticut, with over 42 years of experience. For criminal or personal injury cases, you deserve someone who knows how to fight for you. Call 860-644-4700 today. On today's show, we preview UConn's upcoming matchup with Texas with Longhorns beat reporter Eric Henry. A ton to break down, a ton to look ahead. So without further delay, let's get into it. All right. As promised, Eric Henry, 247, horns247.com. All right. So the first question I have for you, Eric, is what do you see is the biggest challenge with Texas coming to Hartford to play top 5 UConn?
Yeah, first off, Mark, appreciate you having me on. I think the biggest challenge, well, I'll say two. One, this is Texas's first true road game. And when I mentioned to Sean Miller yesterday during the team's availability, his availability, he kind of countered a little bit, rightfully so, because the season opener at Duke, or excuse me, I should say season opener against Duke in Charlotte, I was there. That was it wasn't quite Cameron Indoor Stadium, but that was a road game for Texas. So he's fair there. But obviously you expect that the intensity level to be heightened when you actually go to a team's home arena, going to XL Center. I guess it's People's Bank Arena.
People's Bank Arena. Yep.
People's Bank Arena now, where UConn is 30-4 since 2021, haven't lost there in quite a while, right? So I think that's going to be a challenge for Texas. The second challenge in terms of on the court, Mark, this team commits a lot of fouls. It is something that Sean Miller has harped on over the past 2 weeks. They, at last check entering the game against Southern on Monday night, were 307th in the nation, committing 19.9 fouls per game, putting teams on the line a lot. That they can't, and Sean really stressed it, saying, hey, we can't play 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 plus seconds worth of good defense. And then with 5 seconds left on the clock, bail teams out with a foul, right? So I think those are the two biggest issues because quite frankly, offensively, they've been able to find points. I mean, that's been the biggest change from last year to this.
Yeah, that's fair. I honestly, I'm scrambling to find the number, but UConn fouls a lot too. So when you said that, I took a very big sigh of like, because I want to watch a clean game. Like I think for me, that is aesthetically wise, just taking away covering the team, just watching a great game of basketball is my favorite thing to do. So when you take away the whistles, that's what I'm hoping for. So hopefully Texas figures it out, and hopefully UConn figures out how to not foul as well. Going into this game, I think preseason UConn fans, maybe Texas fans, thought they'd be ranked higher. The promise of Sean Miller coming in and hopefully revitalizing the program again, another cycle of it. But they're 51 in Ken Palm, they're 74 in the net. Is Sean Miller looking, from the Texas perspective, is he looking at this as potentially a springboard into a very difficult SEC season coming up after this and maybe getting a quad one win against a top 5 UConn?
No doubt about it. Sean would never come out publicly and say it. And I think that's the right tone to kind of strike with, your 11 games into, I guess this would be the 11th game into your first season with the program, right? I think that's the right tone to not really come out and say it. But no, it is. And what I'll point to, Mark, is Sean, his own words entering the Duke game, right? He wouldn't outright say it's a litmus test, but he did say, well, if the first game I got to play is against Duke, at least it's going to give you an idea what I have, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I do think he's viewing it as an opportunity, maybe not to get okay, Sean Miller wants to win. I think about Sean Miller, he wants to win, right? So I'm not going to say,
sure,
all right, a moral victory. So I pause there. Of course he wants to win. But even if they don't come out of this game with a win, I think it gives him another sense of, hey, this is where we were when we opened the season. This is where we've kind of been. We beat NC State, had a very disappointing loss to UConn, disappointing loss to Virginia, disappointing loss to Arizona State. Now we face UConn. What have we learned within those 10 games? Because Texas's non-conference schedule outside of this and, kind of what they had with Duke, it hasn't been much, right? So they're going to face Lemoyne and Maryland Eastern, such and such. I should know the other team Texas is facing. I don't know off the top of my head. It's this, for all intents and purposes, is their last chance to really assess where they are before they open SEC play against Mississippi State.
Okay. Before we get into the actual matchup, and I want to hear about your thoughts on player matchups and everything that comes with it, I want to ask you kind of a 30,000-foot view of Texas.
Sure.
I've had this conversation with my co-host on the weekly show that we do on the Big East Energy Network around Texas being a great job. And I'm not asking you to, get your fan base riled up, but I want to ask you about. I almost feel like is there like a Texas curse, because all the resources, all of the now in the SEC before formerly of the Big 12, since Rick Barnes, you've had Shaka Smart, Chris Beard, Rodney Terry, and now you're going to Sean Miller. It's a lot of turnover since 2015. What's your overall assessment of that? I don't mean to say that from a negative spot. I'm just curious from someone that covers the team. Is there a disengagement of football, basketball with fan base in that respect, or what's your take on that?
Mark, trust me, you won't rile up, me or the fan base by asking the question. The question you're asking, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is Texas a good basketball job? Correct?
Yeah, pretty much. Or is there something around it? Is there like a Longhorn basketball curse? Because the football team is at least like in the college football playoff. They're in the conversation all the time. That's really kind of the question. Is it a great job? Is it just a good job? Is it that everyone says it's a great job? I say no. What's your thoughts?
I would love to meet these people who say it's a great job. Quite frankly, that's the best answer I can give you. I'm going to try not to be too long-winded. Okay, so this is my fourth season on the beat. No, third basketball season, fourth football season. I cover both.
Okay.
Here's the deal. Okay, Texas is going to be football first, football second. And if all things are considered equal, and this may rile up Chris Del Conte, it may rile up Sean Miller. If baseball is on point, like they were, and at one point were a top 5 team in the nation last year, baseball and basketball are neck and neck. That's just a fact.
Interesting.
Okay. One of my biggest, I don't want to say frustrations, because listen, I don't have a rooting interest, but what I would challenge Texas fans last year who would say, oh man, why are we underachieving? The standard should be to play for a championship. Chris Del Conte, they have a saying, Mark, it comes from football, where was the standard, the pride and winning tradition of the University of Texas, not entrusted to the weak or the timid, so on and so forth. Basically, it's saying how the standard is to play for championships. And I have always countered and said, when has that been the standard for Texas men's basketball? Right? I don't know when that's been the case. This is always going to be a job, and that's one of the things that I kind of pressed Sean on a little bit, before the season. Sean, you've never been at a place where football is first. You've never been in a place where basketball is second. And he's always said, well, we've got the resources, and Texas wants to win, and Chris Del Conte wants to win. And those are all great things to say. And I believe a measure of that to be true. I'll come to the resources in a second. I believe Chris Del Conte and company want to win. But this is the first time in the era of NIL that you're going to walk in and guess what? You're not going to be the first choice in terms of, hey, we need $1.5 million to go get a big. All right, cool. Let me talk with Steve Sarkisian first, right? Like that's the fact of the matter. And when I say with resource, in terms of resources, Mark, Texas was in contention for JT Toppin last year. Depending on who you ask, I'll give you kind of what I heard, is that more or less they were quabbling around $300,000. I'm sure at UConn, there's no issue getting the $300,000. At Texas,
yeah.
Okay, I won't speak in the affirmative, but I'll say this. At other schools, at other big time, basketball schools, that's not an issue. At Texas, that's going to be a conversation, because entering the year, the deal was Trey Johnson's going to be the highest paid player. And then was, oh man, wait, JT Toppin's available. Well, how can we figure this out? No, those are the type of resource questions that Sean Miller's never had to address. Now, and again, I said I wouldn't be long-winded, so I'll kind of close it on this. Chris Del Conte and company have been committed to saying, hey, we are going to make sure that Sean Miller is adequately taken care of in terms of resources. Texas last year, by our own reporting at 24/7 Sports, 24/7, was a middle of the pack team in terms of NIL spending last year. I do not believe that to be the case this year. But yeah, when you talk about this being a great job, I don't think great basketball jobs have to account for all those things I just laid out.
Yeah, no, I listen, I'm with you on this. You're preaching to the choir. I wanted you to come on the show and talk about this so that I can send this and show Casey Matthews, my cohort, who used to work on the Creighton staff and has talked about how great of a job this is. And I'm just like, I don't agree. So anyway, I wanted to hear it straight from someone that's there, not just my thoughts. But let's circle back to the game, right? Appreciate your comments on that. What do you think the game plan is going to be for Sean Miller and company? I'm sure you guys have seen UConn player. If you haven't, you know their numbers. They're top 10, I believe, in both offense and defense in Ken Palm. I don't have those numbers directly in front of me, but they were 5 and I think 11 the last time I checked. Offense and defense. It's a good team. They're still finding their way in terms of point guard and too many fouls. People are still getting to know each other. Braylon Mullins, their 5-star freshman, just came back from injury against Kansas, had a big game there, and is kind of getting back into the flow, fouled out of the Florida game. Is there a concern? Is there a matchup that you're curious about? Like, how do you see them attacking UConn specifically?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Texas fans are pretty familiar with UConn. These teams have played, each of the last 2 years. Alex Karaban had a hell of a night last year in Moody Center, which I will just sidebar. Probably my favorite quote of the year from last year was from Dan Hurley when I just asked him about Moody Center, and he's like, I guess I won't curse, but Dan Hurley, he said, I couldn't keep up with all the stuff, the bells and whistles, because he was really impressed by Moody Center. So I'll just note that here. But in terms of the matchup, the way Texas has played this year, when they've had success, they've been able to get the ball down low to their big 7-foot center, Modest Fokatitis, for those who may not be familiar. 7-foot Lithuanian, transferred in from Florida Atlantic. Just such a different post presence than Texas has had the last 2 years with Caden Shedrick, someone who just, God bless him. Caden gave everything he had, but was not a guy who was going to work in the post, right? I think the only thing you'd probably want to see out of Mott is to be a little more decisive into getting into his move. But I expect them to start there and then try to work their way inside out. Jordan Pope has been the team's probably most prolific three-point shooter, but you can see other guys like Camden Heide and others who will get shots up. I expect Dalen Swain also to be a big factor. But honestly, Mark, I think things, because when Texas has had their most success this year against real competition, again, no disrespect to Chaminade, or anyone like that, but when Texas has had their best success against real competition, it started with Modest, really, him and I guess to a lesser extent, Lassina Traore, establishing themselves down low, and then the guards playing off of that.
And I appreciate that. I think there's always, when I look at a team, and because I've been doing this for a little bit now with covering the UConn side, and I've been a fan of this team since I was a young kid. But with Dan Hurley, I don't even think about things in my thought process. I think of it how Dan looks at the team. And so I look at one player on Texas that I guarantee he loves and would want to be on his team. And 2, what that kid brings to Texas, and that's Chendell Weaver. Can you talk about what this kid brings? Because listen, we know Cam Heide from when he played at Purdue. He had that putback dunk over, I don't think it was Klingon. It might have been Samson Johnson. That is like, in the finals that everyone went crazy for, and didn't matter because they lost. But incredible athlete. Dalen Swain played at Xavier last year. We're familiar with him. But please, and listen, I know Chendell Weaver's, if you're a basketball fan, you know who he is. But for those who are more casual, I mean, this kid is energy times 1,000. That would be the best way I would put it. But give me your impressions of Chendell Weaver and what he's like to cover.
Yes, as soon as you said, a player that, Dan Hurley would love, I knew you're talking about Kendall Weaver. For those who don't know, began his career at UT Arlington before making his way to Texas after winning, I believe it was WAC conference. Yeah, UT Arlington's in the WAC. Freshman of the year there. I laugh a little bit because I think from the outside perspective, there isn't a coach in America who wouldn't take Kendall Weaver. From the Texas fan perspective, I don't want to say there's frustration, but Kendall really hasn't taken that next step in terms of, and
Sure.
Listen, I'll get to all the great things that Kendall Weaver does, because he does a lot of great things. But great athlete, relentless energy is an understatement. I mean, I cannot think of just a comp of just someone, just the energy never stops, right? Draymond Green, maybe Dennis Rodman, right? Like those old school, just never Energizer Bunny to a T, right? And that he deserves credit for. I think the hope was that Kendall Weaver, after his sophomore year, because he shot the three-point shot well as a freshman, but obviously a different level, right? The hope was as a sophomore, where he was just energy, hustle, put back dunks, drive somewhat recklessly to the hoop with no, care for his body and say, hey, I'm getting to the line somehow. The hope was that his shot would be more consistent as a junior. Spent most of last year banged up, had a groin injury, hip flexor injury. Tremont Mark was groin. Kendall Weaver was a hip flexor injury, cost him about 15 games. So I guess that progression never really came. Then Sean Miller entering this year was talking about Kendall Weaver. One of our best shooters. Kendall was seen, during practice, just getting up 3-point shots. And then in the game, it's either he doesn't really trust the shot, or, maybe he feels just more confident in doing what Kendall Weaver does, which is, hey, get the ball, penetrate, and try to get to the line. So I think that's kind of a source of Texas fans' frustration. But no, everything you kind of lay out there in terms of relentless energy, effort, defense, one of the better perimeter defensive players. And for my money, the last 2 years, the best rebounding guard in the SEC. I mean, Kendall Weaver is capable, maybe not so much with Lassina Traore and Dalen Swain being part of this lineup, but last year when the bigs weren't really rebounding, you could bet all 6'3", 180 pounds of Kendall Weaver, or I guess 170. I'm not going to give him the 180.
Yeah.
Would lead the team in rebounding every night.
No, he's maybe at 180 soaking wet, like if he jumped out of a pool. But yeah, he's just an interesting cat. Like he always pops for me whenever I watch Texas or whenever he's on the screen. So that's kind of where I went with that. Is there a matchup that you're like, in terms of this UConn team? How do you think Texas handles the offensive sets that UConn runs? Because we had Fran Fraschilla on previewing the Florida game a couple days ago. And one of the things that bothers me about the broadcasting of UConn games is when a broadcaster doesn't do the research and realizes that UConn doesn't play fast. This isn't 10 years ago. They don't get out on the fast break. They take advantage of transition opportunities, but they really don't. They don't love it. They're like in the 300s in terms of tempo. But internally in the half court set, they go quick, and that's something that Fran mentioned. They're constantly in motion. How does Texas handle that intricacy of, are they going to try to take away more Terrace Reed now that he's healthy? Or are they going to try to take away more 3-pointing? What's the game plan from Sean Miller's perspective, you think?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because Sean was kind of asked a question. I won't out the reporter, but he was asked a question about, hey, this team likes to play fast. And Sean said, well, he didn't quite bury the question. We said, all right, let me put a little more context to that. I think Texas will make a dedicated effort to trying to take away the three. Why do I say that? Because if you take a look at Texas's last 3 games in Division I competition, and I'm going to exclude Southern from that, no disrespect to the Jaguars. I'm going to talk about Arizona State, NC State, and Virginia. They're allowing 49.7% from 3. Okay, that's been the Achilles heel. So I think Texas realizes, hey, if we can't defend the 3 better than we have against more or less adequate or comparable Division I competition, we're just not going to be able to play. Right. So I do firmly believe in, and kind of, again, I don't want to say Sean is, kind of tipped his hand, but if you kind of read between the lines, as I'm learning to do in my first year covering Sean, you get a little idea where he's thinking. I expect that to be kind of the focal point on Friday night.
All right. You have a score prediction for me before we let you get out of here? Or what are your thoughts with Texas playing in Hartford, People's Bank Arena? We've been calling it the Vault. What are your thoughts on the game on Friday night?
Yeah. It's funny you talk about the name of People's Bank Arena. Ironically, my mother's actually from Hartford, so she'll go back to the Hartford Civic Center days if you could quiz her there.
I almost, and it's literally sitting over there. I have a hat that's a khaki hat with the Hartford Civic Center logo that I wear every once in a while on the show. So listen, I go back to the Hartford Civic Center, that old court when the Celtics used to play there with the parquet and the red. Yep. Yeah, that's my childhood. So absolutely, man, that's cool.
No, I expect this a game. In terms of score, I see it somewhere in the realm of 85-75. That's kind of where it's in favor of UConn. To be clear, I think this is a game truly is another litmus test for Texas. I do think I said at the onset of the season, I think this is a tournament team. Quite frankly, I think Sean Miller, and this is no disrespect to Rodney Terry, I think Sean Miller is an upgrade as a coach. Just that alone, with the pieces in place in the SEC, I think they can go 9-9 in the SEC and win 18 games ish. In regular season. But where I'm going with that is in terms of specificity to this matchup, I think it's another litmus test for Sean to figure out what he has 1 through 8, because that's really what he's working with right now, right? It's not 9, it's not 10 guys, it's 1 through 8, right? And obviously he had Dalen Swain at Xavier, he had Lucina Traore, or didn't have him. He missed the entire year at Xavier, but he was under him. So I think he's still trying to figure out just not necessarily. You should figure out what he has, but also how to play to these guys' strengths, right? So I see this being another opportunity for Sean to say, okay, when we got to face real competition, the big boys, this is what this player does well. This is when this player does such and such well, when they come in, so on and so forth, because he's mix and matched, some of the rotations, even coming off the bench a lot. I think more or less this is a game where if he can get Texas to compete the way they did against Duke, which, if my memory serves me correct, I was there. That was a 2-point halftime game. If memory serves me correct.
And they were up.
Yeah, and carry that into the second half. Again, wants to win the game. Sean's a competitor, but I think truthfully, if this game is close, 33, 34 minutes in, I think Sean will say, okay, at least I've got this thing moving in the right direction, and it's not more of, well, I got to go back to the drawing board, right? I think that's kind of where I see this one.
Well, if it gives your fans any solace to know that UConn has had trouble, the one thing that Dan says that they have trouble with this year so far is playing with a lead and giving things back. They kind of did it to Florida this weekend, this past couple of days too, when they got up 11. They allowed Florida back in, and it was a 3-point game with 6 seconds to go. So if that's the case, then I think they both will have something to draw from. If UConn pushes it to, 10, 15, 20, or if it comes back to now it's a 2 or 3 possession game or 1 possession game late, then I think we'll both know where these teams are at going forward. But Eric, hey man, thanks so much for jumping on. I know it's on the screen, but tell people where they can find your work if they're interested in Texas basketball and football.
Yeah. You can find my Texas football, basketball, baseball. I've got all 3 sports at horns247.com, 24/7 sports. You can find me all social media platforms at Eric C. Henry _. And hey, if your travels kind of take you to Central Texas, you can find me on the local sports radio station here, AM 1300 The Zone.
All right. That's Eric Henry, and we'll be back.
This episode is brought to you by the law offices of James E. Sulik, reliable attorneys right here in South Windsor. If you're dealing with a criminal case or a personal injury situation, you deserve someone with real experience. James Sulik brings over 42 years of legal expertise to the table. And here's the difference. This isn't some giant firm where clients get lost in the shuffle. It's a small office, so you get true, personalized attention from people who know your name and care about your case. Same-day emergency consultations are available. When life hits you fast, they're ready. Call James E. Sulik today. Trusted attorneys Connecticut always turns to when it matters most. Give them a call today. You see that number rolling across your screen there, 860-644-4700 or jamesesulik.com. Let's check that out. Thank you for sponsoring us here on the Hoops Cap.
All right. Welcome back to Hoops Cap. That was Eric Henry of 247. Hey, listen, bottom line is, I know we brought Eric in because I wanted everyone to have some, a preview from the other side, so to speak, and not just hear me rant about one thing or the other. UConn has to win this game. And if I'm being honest about it, they need to win by more than 10 points. I think he said something like 85-75. I'm cool with that. Sign me up. It's a quad 2 game for UConn. It's a quad 1 game for Texas. Don't be surprised, like the way Fran Fraschilla said about Florida, if Texas doesn't come out desperate. Because if Sean Miller is doing his job, and there's no reason to think he isn't, unless you're a Xavier fan, that this team will not know the sense of urgency that is this game. Because I know they're going to have like a million quad 1 games in the SEC. But if things change and you can hang your hat on a win at UConn, then that helps your seeding. That helps the potential to get into the tournament if you're in the bubble. But as my friend Casey Matthews has said on this network on the weekly show, there's a lot more landmines that UConn has that we really didn't even know was going to be a part of that. I thought Texas was going to be a top 25 game. I thought it was going to be a quad one win that they could hang their hat on. This has now become a must win just from the seeding aspect. Listen, I don't love talking about that stuff, and that's why I really don't talk about it a lot. But in terms of UConn needs to win this game because I don't want it to look bad on the resume. Who would have thought a game against Texas would look bad on the resume if it becomes a loss? So anyway, that's the show today. We'll see you next time. We'll see you tomorrow talking about the women with my buddy T. Baker. And we'll see you live after the game on Friday night. Roll skis.
Let's get it. Let's get it. Let's get it. Let's get it. Yeah. UConn, baby. Home of the champions.